Okay, so I have this right now pretty scary application here. It's from my React course where I use NextJS and Tailwind to create this movie application. And yeah, it's because Halloween is coming up, I guess, because this movie is the most popular. And that is the scary stuff here that's shown here in this hero image. And we're going to update NextJS to the latest version. So on the upgrade guide, beta.nextjs.org, and I'm here at the upgrade guide here in the menu. So they tell you how to do it. So copy this one here to update the packages you need. And it's essentially Next React and the React DOM and the ESLint config. I go to my console, paste it in, and I update it. Go inside of the code editor. And if we look at the package, you can see that it updated React, it updated the ESLint config, but it didn't update Next. And that is probably because it's locked to this version here. I'm going to change this manually, 13.0.0. And then I'm going to run npm I again. I go back to this one here and see what we have to do. We also have to update the ESLint to the latest version. So let's do that also. Paste it in. Clear. I'm going to start this application again by running npm run dev. So let's see if it works. And it doesn't work. And you can see there are some stuff that has changed here, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you in this video. So first of all, we have to check our image component because that one has changed a bit in version 13. So we have to go through our application step by step to update it properly here. So let's check in the components folder what we got here. So the thumb, I guess that one is complaining. Yeah, we don't have this prop anymore. That's called layout. Instead, we just have fill. Like that. We don't have object fit, so we're going to remove that one. And also, if we check this out, because we want this one to fill, so I'm going to add that in with Tailwind here instead and change it to object-cover. So it's CSS here now that I'm using for that one. And also we have to actually change some stuff here because Tailwind won't work now. We can do that also. If I go inside the tailwind.config, you can see that it looks in the pages folder now. We are going to have the app folder instead of pages. So I'm going to change this to app, or we can do even better. We can actually add it in. So we have the pages also. Something like that. So now it will check both the pages folder and the app folder and the components folder as before. So that's great. That's everything we need to do in the Tailwind config file. Go back to the thumb. One thing that's also changed here is that they want you to specify different widths on the viewport so it can choose the correct image. If we know that we, for example, when we're on the desktop, we are going to show these thumbnails 5 in a row, 5 columns. So that means that we don't need to have the full image width of the full screen. So they have this nice little prop called sizes equal, and it's a string. And we have parentheses. I'm going to set the max width to 768 pixels. That's on small devices. Then the image is going to be the full width, 100 viewport width. Then I have a comma, and I'm going to set one more here. I don't know, this one actually won't format it correctly here, so it may look a little bit ugly here now. So I set it to 1200 pixels. This one shouldn't actually be there. It shouldn't close it there. We should just have the comma. And at 1200 pixels width, I know that I'm going to have five columns for these thumbnails. So I set it to 20 viewport width. That's a fifth of the full viewport. And then we can close it there. Also, one more thing here, where when we load the images now, I have this blur image that displays before the images actually has loaded. And now they want this one to be, they want it to be a data URL. So let's check here in the documentation for images. You can set the blur data URL, and this one is actually set automatically if we have a local image. But if we have remote images that we're going to have now, because they are going to be fetched from the API, we have to set this manually. So I'm setting the placeholder to blur and the blur data, just as I did here. But this time, I'm not going to have this image here. So I'm actually going to generate a data URL. And they actually had a link to that one here before, maybe here. Yeah, you can also generate a solid color data URL to match the image. So that's what I'm going to do. And you can choose whatever color you want here. Okay. And then down here, it's important that we grab this complete data here and not just this one. So everything here with data, copy it from the CSS here, go back, and I paste it in here. And it looks a little bit ugly now because it's a long string here, but that will work just fine. So that's it for this component. And then we're going to have a few more images here, if I remember correctly. I have one image in the search input. That's the little logo I have to display from the movie database API. So let's go inside of that one. So down below here, I have this image here. This one is a local file, so we don't actually need to set the width and height. And I actually grabbed this one directly like this, and now they want you to import it instead when it's local. So I'm going to do that up here. Import TMDB logo from, and I have this one in my public folder. So this is the TMDB logo. That means that we were importing it here now, and then we can change this one here. TMDB logo instead. So that's probably a little bit cleaner. And this one is also going to be what they call a client component, because all components in Next.js 13 are server components by default. And when we use a client component, because we're using state here, that means that it's a client component. Server components can't have state. So we have to mark this one with use client for Next.js to know that this is a client component. And I think this is it for this one. All right. Then I have an image in, I guess it is in movie info, but that should be the thumb that I use. Yes, it's the thumb. But I actually have this image here, so I have to remove this one here also. Object fit doesn't exist. Layout, fill. So I change this one to fill instead. Object position doesn't exist anymore. And here I'm actually getting the URL for this image from a prop. So that's the one that I have here. And I have this placeholder here again for the blur data. So we can actually grab the same one here, this data, copy it, go back to the movie info, paste it in. And this should be it for this component, I think. So let's save it and move on. I have the hero. So we don't have the object fit prop anymore. Don't have the object position anymore. And fill, we're going to change that to fill. And instead of those, I'm going to have a class name, and I use Tailwind to style this, to set it to object-cover, just as I did before. So this is it for the hero. Then I have the header. I have the logo and stuff here. We don't actually need to set the width and height anymore on those local images. The source, I'm going to do the same stuff here. I'm going to import the images, import RMDB logo from ../../public RMDB logo. And then I have the small logo that is displaying when we're on mobile devices. So it's going to be called RMDB logo small from ../../public. And I have the small logo there. So I change these ones out here. RMDB logo. And this one is going to be the small logo. RMDB logo small. And I think that should be all. And it's running. So go back to the application. See if I can start it up. And here it is. And it complains here on some image. Yeah, RMDB logo. It's the largest contentful pane. So you can set a priority on that one. Priority. So it's great because it tells you what you have to do. Save it, go back, reload the application. So now it works without any errors. And that's great, but now it's using the old page folder. We're going to use the new app folder. And also we have to do some stuff because I'm using React Query, or Tanstack Query as it's called now. So we have to change some stuff there, and that's what I'm going to show you next. Okay, next up is to use React Query and make that work in NextJS 13. So if we look here now, we have this document and we have this app. So inside the app, we're creating the query client for Tanstack or React Query. And we can actually do that now when we're going to use the new app folder that is in NextJS 13. So first of all, we're going to create that folder, app. So that's the one that we're going to use instead of pages. And the great thing here is that it works with both now. So you don't need to just use the app folder. You can use pages also. I'm actually not going to touch this API because I have an API route here that I use to hide the key for the API. So instead of using that API key in the client, I hit this endpoint here. And this one will in turn from the server use that key. So it won't be exposed to the browser. But for now, I don't really know if they're going to keep the API routes or not, but they haven't done anything to it. So inside of pages, when you have this API folder, you can create these API routes. And I'm going to keep this one here in the pages, but that's the only one that I'm going to keep. So this underscore app and underscore document are all going to be combined inside a new file that's called layout inside of the app folder. So I create a new file, layout.tsx. And what are we doing here? So in this document here, for example, or in the app, you can see that we import some stuff here. So we're going to need the styles, query client, and query provider. We don't actually need those in this component, and I'm going to show you why in a second. So this is the only one that we need here for now. It is the global styles. And then we check the document. We're going to need this link here. And I have this little where I set the font also. But let's go back inside of the layout and create this component. And when it's in the app component at the root, it's called root layout. So when we're at the root level, we need to have a root layout. And this is the only layout that you need. Otherwise, you can create layouts for each route in the different folders that you're going to have here for your routes. And you don't need to have those layouts, but the root layout needs to be there. So this one is going to take in the children. And I'm going to type this also as I'm in Typescript, so children. It's going to be a React node. Or we can actually do it a little bit cleaner. Type props equal children. It's going to be a React node. So instead of this one here, we have the props and we have our component. I'm going to make an implicit return. Then we have the HTML. The language is going to be set to English. You need to provide HTML and body, but you don't need to provide a head. In our case, we want to provide a head because we have the link to the font that we copied from the document here. That's the one that I'm pasting in here in the head. Yeah, and now you can see that it complains here because these linting rules are from the old Next.js, so they haven't really updated this yet. We don't really care about this now because it complains that I should use the internal head component instead. Yeah, you can see here that they don't use those ones here, so that's not recommended. So we use the regular ones here instead. And that's why the linter is complaining, because it thinks it is on Next 12 now. So yeah, it's not really updated, so don't worry about that. And it also complains here because you shouldn't import this font here. But then we have the body. I have a class name, just as before, where I set the font to Railway. And then we have the children like that. And as I like to export my components at the bottom, I have an export default root layout like that. So this is how you set it up in the root layout. We are also going to use React Query. So we have to do some stuff here because this one is a server component and React Query is client-based. So we can't really create it here as we did in the app. That won't work. But we can instead create a new component that is a client component that we can import here and use it here. Also bear in mind that there's actually no recommendations or anything for this yet. So I'm just doing this from my own head now, so to say. So yeah, don't really know how you should do it or what the best practices would be. This is a way that works and that I tried out. So for now it works. But create a new file inside app, React query wrapper.tsx. And this one won't create a route because it only creates routes if you have a file that's called page.tsx. And if you want another route, a nested route, you create a folder and then you have a file inside of that one that tell you all about it if you read the documentation. So I'm not going to go through that here. I'm just going to make this app to work in NextJS 13 and hopefully you will learn something from it. So let's see here. You're going to have a client component. So we mark it with use client like that. And then if we look inside of the app, we can import the query client and the query client provider from Tanstack Query like that. So we create a query client just as we did before in that component. Query client like that. Then I'm going to have some props. We're going to have the children again because this one is going to wrap everything. So we have a react.react node for the props. And then we can create a component. Const react query wrapper equal. We have the children. We have the props. And we make an implicit return. We use the query client provider. We give it the client like that. And we have the children. And I'm going to export default React query wrapper. So this is the component. This is the client-based component instead that we can use because you can import client-based component in the root layout, but the root layout component itself is a server component. So we can actually create the query client by just defining it inside of that one. So that's why I create this component instead. Just the same stuff as I did here, but I do it in a separate component instead. So we don't actually need to import React, but we are going to import the React query wrapper from /React query wrapper. And here where we have the children, we're going to use that React query wrapper, and we can move the children inside of that one. Do some auto formatting, and it should hopefully work. I guess this head shouldn't really complain here now. I guess I didn't update the linting stuff. It hasn't worked as it should because I know that this one shouldn't complain. It's only this one that should complain. So make sure to install the new linting rules also for NextJS 13. And at least this head shouldn't be complaining. But I won't do that now. I just will keep on going here. So we have the React query client hopefully set up for us. So we don't need this one anymore. We can delete the app. We can delete the document. We don't need that one. And we have the index here. Copy all this code here. Go inside app, create a new file that's called page.tsx. And the recommendation here is that you create a page that is a server component, and then you import your client component here also. So we're going to create another file that's called homepage.tsx and paste everything in there from the index.tsx here. That's what I'm doing here. And one more thing I have to do here is to mark this as client also. Use client because it is a client component. We're using state and we're using React query and stuff like that. And this next page isn't really in NextJS 13. So I'm not going to type it with that one for now. So this is the home page. Everything else is exactly the same for now. So inside page, import your client component. So I import homepage from /homepage. I create a page. And this one is going to be async because if you want, you can fetch data here in this one and send it in by props to your component. In our case, or in my case, or in our case, we don't have any props to this homepage. Export default page. And it is complaining here on something. I have misspelled it. home page, like that. So this is how they recommend you to do it. You have all your pages are server components, because then you can fetch data and you can feed your components with that data. So I create a client component, I import it in the page component, and I use it there. So page is a server component and homepage is a client component. Yeah, I have to remove this index also, of course, otherwise it will grab that one. So now we have the app folder. And it says that the route don't exist. All right, let's restart it again. Yeah, you can see that it tells me here, I actually forgot to set this one. I need to set the experimental in the NextJS config. So next.config, otherwise it won't work. I forgot that this was experimental. So I set this one here, the app there, I set it to true. And it's also important that you're on node 18 or above. Otherwise, you have to set enable undici, I think it is, to true, like that. But we don't need to do that because I'm on node version 19 now, but it's important that you're on 18 or above. Yeah, now I guess I have to restart it because it's in the config, npm run dev. And it is working. And you can see that it blurs up here also with that little data URL that I created. It's a little bit slow now, but that's fine. So React query is working just as it should. And there are some minor adjustments we have to do here also. You can see that it flipped this one here. And that is probably because if I look here in the components and header, and I have that logo here. I guess it's the link here that changed. So I can change it to flex maybe. Yeah, and it works now. This one also needs a little bit of adjustment. So inside the search input, set it to top 9 instead, maybe. Yeah, then it's there in the middle. But I did something wrong here with this one. It isn't actually applying the styles at all here. And that is, of course, because now we don't have the document and the app in the page folder. So Tailwind isn't really set up. It's only set up now in the new app folder here that we created. So this is one is going to be fixed when we move that one also there. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to move this individual movie page. And here I'm going to fetch the data from the server. So instead of using get server-side props or get static props, I'm going to fetch it the new way in NextJS 13. Okay, so the last part to get this application up and running in NextJS 13 is to fetch some data for the individual movie page and change that one, so to say, because here we're using get static props. So this has to change. But I'm going to copy all of this here. Inside the app folder, I'm going to create a new folder. And just as before, we have these square brackets and ID. So that is going to be the URL param. And inside there, instead of an index file, I'm going to create a page.tsx file and paste in all that code inside of that one. Yeah, so now it's complaining here because these ones should be imported from ../../. We could also change the base URL in the TS config, so we don't need to do this here. But I think it's fine for now. And then we have some other stuff here, because now it complains we shouldn't use get static props or get static paths. And down here, we can actually remove this first. So this one, we can remove this one, delete the 404. Yeah, we can have it there. It doesn't matter. But this one, here I fetch some data in get static props. I fetch from 2 endpoints actually. And then I return them in the props here for the page. And I also have get static paths here. So, and it's a little bit different here in this app folder, the new one in NextJS 13. So let's see here how I'm going to do this best. First of all, we need this param here. So how do we get that into the page? We're not going to need these props here. So remove them. And the next page type, we don't need that one. So for now, that type isn't the right type here because it's a little bit different. And this one is actually going to be async. So const movie async. You can call it movie page maybe instead. And we're not gonna have all these props here. So instead, we're gonna get from the params, we're gonna get the ID. And I'm gonna type the new props. Type props equal params. And the ID is gonna be a string. So as I said before, there aren't really any best practices yet. So this is how I do it now. And to get it to work, I don't know if this is gonna be the best practice in the future. Shouldn't be there, shouldn't be, it should be there instead. So there we have the props. Then I can make an implicit return. So instead I'm going to change that to an explicit return like that. And I think we set up pretty good to go here. Now I have to change that export also to movie page. Yeah. Instead of this get static props and get static paths, I'm going to create two fetch functions here. And if we go and check the documentation here on, let's see here, data fetching, we have it here. I want to do the fetching in parallel. Let's see here, parallel data fetching. So this is the one that I'm going to do because I'm fetching from two different resources. So I'm going to have two fetch functions. And that means that instead of resolving the promise here in this component, that is going to be our movie page component, we just get the promise here and then we resolve the promise that's going to hold the data that's for this component. And then we send along the other promise to the component that is going to use that one. So I'm going to show that one for you. But first, let's create these fetch functions. So I go back to my code editor. And I'm going to have an async function that's called get movie data. It's going to take in the ID, and it's a string because it's from the URL params. Const movie equal await. And it's important to use fetch here because that's the built-in stuff they have in NextJS 13. So it's actually not the regular fetch. It's a kind of modified fetch they use here. And I have the movie URL that I send in the ID to. And this is the one that I use up here. Let's see here where I have it. And that is the one that I use down here also when I create the URL, because when fetching from the movie, it's a specific URL. Otherwise, when we fetch the credits, it's another URL. So if we go down here to the config, you can see that it's two functions here that creates this URL for us. Go back to the page, go up here again. Then I'm going to return, and I await when I convert it to JSON. You don't really need to do that if you look in their documentation to actually use await. But I need to do that because I want to cast it as a movie also, so I get the correct types. Do some auto formatting, and it puts some parentheses there. So if we look in the documentation here, they don't actually do that. They just return the JSON without the await, and that's fine. But I can't do that if I want to cast it like this. So it needs to run the JSON conversion before I can cast it to a movie. All right, then I copy this one, and I'm going to call this get credit data. And instead of fetch from the movie, I'm going to fetch the credits URL. And I cast it as credits. That means that if we hover here, you can see that we get the correct types here. And that's really, really nice to have that one for later. Okay, so I think we're good to go here. So what I essentially did was creating two functions for fetching this one here instead. We're also going to do some check here to just get the directors, but we're not going to do that in this component because I use the directors in this movie info component instead. So that's what I'm going to do inside of there. But for now, let's fetch this data here. So up here in the movie page component, const, and I have an underscore because these are unresolved promises. Get movie data, I send in the ID, and then const underscore credits equal get credits data, and I send in the ID again. And then for this component, I only need the movie info. So I'm going to resolve that promise. Const movie equal await movie. And you can see when I hover here now that I have the correct types here. So that's super sweet. And now it's complaining here because, yeah, it doesn't have the directors here. So yeah, that's fine for now. I'm going to comment this one out here. That's the grid with the actors. I'm going to do that later. So bear with me here. We need to modify the movie info. Now we're going to resolve this promise instead of sending in the directors. So I'm going to create a new prop that's called credits promise. And I give it the credits promise. And now it complains, of course, because we haven't created that one. So I move inside the movie info. I need to update the props, the types for the props with the credits promise. And it's going to be a promise of credits. And I also need to import this one. And then we also structure it out here for the component. And I need to change this one from an implicit return again to an explicit return, so that we can do some stuff here. First, we're going to resolve the promise. Const credits await credits promise. All right. And then we need to mark this as an async function instead. And this is new in NextJS 13, where you actually have the JSX components to be async. And that's why also the linter is going to complain. They tell you about that in the documentation also. They haven't fully fixed that yet, so it will complain. Then we also need the directors. So if we go back to the page, we do this little stuff here where we just get the directors. So I'm going to copy this one, go inside the movie info, paste it in, remove the directors here. We don't have that type anymore and that prop. So do some auto formatting, and there we go. And this should hopefully work now. Save it, go back to the page. And now we have everything, so we can remove this get static props and get static paths. Now it should only complain here because this is a JSX component that's also async. You can see it complains that it's a promise now, but it will work now anyways. Otherwise, you can comment it out and don't use the linting here. We can also remove these types. We don't need them here. We don't need the basic fetch function as we used before, because now we're using the built-in fetch. So let's save it and see what we got. If I go inside the app, click on a movie, and here we have it. We have the data here. You can see how fast it loads also. So that's pretty awesome. But we also should have the actors, and that's the one that I commented out here. And that's because this one also needs the credits promise and get the data from that one. So I'm actually going to create a new component for this one instead, so we can send it into that component. I think that's a better approach to actually have a separate component. So inside the components, I create a component called actors, and I have a new file, actors.tsx. And here I copy everything here from the grid, the complete stuff that's inside the grid, and also the grid. And I go inside the actors. We're going to need some stuff here first. We need the URLs for the images. Import image base URL, and these ones are from the config. Post size. And we need some components. Import grid. And we also need an import card. And then we need some types. import type credits. And I use the keyword type here also because I like to be explicit. Then I know that it's a type. And these ones are from dot dot forward slash dot dot forward slash API forward slash types. And everything of this is in my original course, so that's nothing that I'm going to go through here. We're going to have some props for this one. Type props equal. We have the credits promise again. It's a promise. And the credits type. Like that. Then we can create a component. Const actors equal. And it's async. We have the credits promise. We give it the type of props. We make an explicit return here. So return, and then we paste everything in from the page. So we have the grid, we have the card, and it's complaining here now because we're going to use the credits instead here. But first we have to resolve the promise. Credits, await, credits promise. And instead of the cast here, we have the credits. And from the credits, we have the dot cast. Then we need to export default actors. Like that, save it, go back to the page, and we import this component, actors. And instead of this stuff here, we use the actors component because it's the same. And we have the credits promise, and it's going to be the underscore credits. And we self-close it, and it's complaining. Yeah, and that is because it's a promise. So yeah, it will complain on these two now, but it will work. So this is how we grab that data in parallel, just according to the documentation for NextJS 13. There's one more thing we can do, and we can wrap this one in a react.suspense with a fallback that's going to be a spinner. So we have to import the spinner also. We can move them inside of this suspense, and that means meanwhile when we fetch the data and resolve these promises, we're going to show this fallback that is a spinner. So import spinner, something like that, and React can actually be imported at the top instead. Save it, just make sure that I saved all the files. Go back to our application, reload it. See what happens. We have the actors here, and it's actually pretty fast now, so we can't see those spinners in action. We can change that one to see network conditions, and I throttle it to fast 3G. And I click here, let's see what happens. You can see that the spinner was there, and now it's just fetching the images here, so that's why it's blurred. But the actual data is fetched. So it's actually pretty fast anyways. So that's great. So this is how you do it. This is how you refactor this application to use NextJS 13. I hope you learned something in this little tutorial or little course or whatever you call it. And if you like my stuff, please subscribe, please support me. I'm so grateful for that. And hopefully see you in another one.